The clatter of a fork hitting a china plate was the gunshot that started the rest of Grace Miller's life. The sound that silenced the cozy chatter of Antonio's Italian restaurant in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where her family had gathered under the guise of celebrating her high school graduation. A celebration that curdled the moment her father, Robert, a man who valued stoic practicality above all else, cleared his throat and raised his glass of iced tea not to her, but to the idea of her inevitable failure. To Grace, he began, his voice heavy with a disappointment he'd nursed for 18 years. Who has finally finished one thing? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. College for art history. He shook his head, a gesture that encompassed her entire being. You're too fragile for the real world. Too emotional. You'll never have the fortitude for a career of substance. Never wear a uniform that demands respect like in the military or police. You'll never succeed in anything that requires a backbone. You'll amount to a pleasant hobby, maybe teaching kids to paint, but let's call it what it is, a nice, small life. The table, her mother Elaine, her brother Kyle, her aunt and uncle, fell into a thick, complicit silence. Their eyes darting between Robert's stern face and Grace's, which had gone as pale as the tablecloth. She felt the heat of humiliation crawl up her neck. Her dream of studying culture, and maybe, just maybe, serving her country in some capacity, evaporating under the weight of his pronouncement, her vision swimming with unshed tears of shame, that she blinked back furiously. And in that suspended moment, as Kyle smirked into his breadstick, something inside Grace hardened from wounded clay into unbreakable ceramic. She didn't scream, didn't argue. She placed her own napkin neatly on the table, stood up on legs that felt like water, and walked out of the restaurant, the buzz of resumed conversation at her back feeling like a swarm of bees. Drove her used Corolla not home, but to the bus station, and with the $401.12 from her secret grocery store cashier savings, bought a one-way ticket to the furthest place she could afford, Detroit, leaving behind the ghost of the nice, small life she was supposed to want, her father's prophecy of weakness, now a brand she would spend years disproving. Detroit in December was a landscape of gray skies and grayer prospects. Her first home was a cot in a downtown shelter, where hope seemed to be rationed along with the thin soup. Her first job cleaning office buildings in the sterile, empty hours before dawn, the smell of industrial cleaner, and loneliness her new perfume. Her body a constant symphony of aches. Her diet a grim calculation of calories per dollar, the isolation so complete, she sometimes spoke aloud just to hear a voice, even if it was her own. She moved through the city's ruins and renewal like a phantom, taking a second job sorting packages in a frigid warehouse on the riverfront, her hands growing rough and chapped. Saving every single quarter and dime in a coffee can labeled boots. A literal reference to the first thing she would need for the path she had already chosen in her heart. A path her father had declared impossible. When Detroit's chill seeped too deep into her bones, she followed a rumor of work to Indianapolis, then to St. Louis, each city a chapter in a manual on American perseverance, each job, diner waitress, night shift gas station attendant, hotel housekeeper, a lesson in being the anonymous, replaceable worker her family assumed was her ceiling. But within that anonymity, Grace was undergoing a fundamental reconstruction, her quiet nature becoming not a weakness, but a reservoir of focused energy, her emotional depth channeled into a profound empathy she would later use to understand human motives, her hunger for purpose a guiding star in the bleakest nights. She spent her free hours not resting, but preparing, using the public library's computers to research every branch of the U.S. military, every entry requirement, every potential career track, finally settling on the Army for its sheer size, diversity of opportunity, and reputation for building discipline from the ground up. She enrolled in online general education courses, studied late into the night after double shifts, ran until her lungs burned in all weather, did push-ups on the floor of her rented room until her arms trembled, physically willing herself into the person who could pass the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the person who could survive basic combat training. The day she walked into the Army recruiting station in a strip mall outside St. Louis, her paperwork perfectly in order, her body lean and strong, her gaze steady. The recruiter saw not a fragile girl, but a determined young woman, and when the contract was signed, she felt not fear, but the first flicker of a belonging she had never known at home. Shipping out to Fort Jackson for basic training was less of a shock and more of a brutal validation. The shouted drills, the relentless physical demands, the psychological stress designed to forge a collective identity. All of it felt like a language she was suddenly fluent in. The emotional neglect of her childhood had taught her self-reliance. Her father's dismissal had armored her against the drill sergeant's critiques, which were about performance, not her inherent worth. She thrived in the structure, excelled at marksmanship, finding a strange peace in the controlled focus it required, aced the land navigation courses, her quiet perseverance earning the respect of her peers and the notation in her file, Miller, G. Resilient. A quiet leader. High tolerance for stress. She volunteered for, and was selected for military intelligence, a field requiring acute analysis, cultural understanding, and meticulous patience. Traits her family had mislabeled as fragility and daydreaming. Advanced individual training was a different kind of challenge, a feast of languages, geopolitics, and surveillance technology that she devoured, proving that her art history mind was perfectly wired for pattern recognition and critical thinking. Her first duty station was at Fort Hood, Texas, in a tactical intelligence unit, and her career began not with glory, but with the painstaking, critical work of supporting maneuver units, her analysis often forming the backbone of operational plans. She was the soldier who stayed late to verify a source, who cross-referenced satellite imagery until her eyes blurred, who learned passable Arabic from a patient MCO, her dedication absolute, her personal life pared down to letters from a few Army friends, and the steady growth of her thrift savings plan. Deployments to Kuwait and later, a more forward position in Jordan, were where theory met the dust of reality, where the pressure was immense and the stakes were real. And Grace not only endured, she contributed in ways that earned formal commendations, her calm under pressure and analytical insights directly aiding mission success. Promotions came, as they do for those who combine competence with unwavering reliability, specialist, sergeant, then, after she completed her degree online, and was selected for officer candidate school. A seismic shift in identity. OCS was another crucible, testing leadership under exhaustion, and she emerged not just as an officer, but as a platoon leader respected by the gruff, combat, hardened NCOs who could smell pretense a mile away. Captain's bars followed, and with them, greater responsibility, leading a military intelligence detachment, her authority now formal, her decisions affecting the lives of soldiers and the outcomes of missions. The call that would set the final stage for her quiet vindication came not from the Army, but from a hometown veterans association, having tracked her career through mutual acquaintances. They invited Captain Grace Miller to be the guest of honor and keynote speaker at the Grand Rapids Veterans Day ceremony, to be awarded a local meritorious service medal for her exemplary service and as an inspiration to young women in the community. She accepted, not for them, but for every quiet girl told she wasn't enough, her heart steady, for this was not a homecoming, but a deployment to familiar territory. The ceremony was held in the city's Central Park. A crisp November morning, Grace stood backstage in her immaculate Army service uniform, her rows of ribbons and badges over her heart, the weight of her rank and accomplishments a tangible force. She knew her family would be there. Her mother had emailed, a tremulous, guilt-ridden message she had not replied to. But she knew their pride would compel them to attend the town's biggest civic event. She took the podium after a string of introductions, her posture perfect, her voice clear and strong as she spoke about service, sacrifice, and the unexpected paths to strength, her eyes occasionally scanning the crowd of veterans, families, and town dignitaries. And there, in the third row, she saw them. Robert, her father, older, stooped Elaine, her mother, nervously clutching a program, Kyle, looking uncomfortable in a suit. They were staring at her as if she were an apparition. The moment of true reckoning came, when the retired Army general, presiding, stepped forward to pin the Meritorious Service Medal to her uniform. As the general spoke her citation, detailing her intelligence work in combat zones, her leadership, her dedication, the camera on the local news feed zoomed in on the medal being secured above her heart. In the crowd, Robert Miller's face underwent a seismic collapse. The arrogant certainty that had defined him for decades shattered. His jaw went slack, his eyes, fixed on that gleaming medal, filled with a wet, glistening shock that quickly dissolved into pure, unadulterated shame. He looked from the medal to his daughter's composed, proud face, and a single tear traced a path through his stubble. Elaine, beside him, broke completely, weeping openly into a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking, the sound a soft, desperate keen. Kyle just stared, his earlier smugness replaced by a dazed incomprehension. Grace accepted the medal, saluted the general, and concluded her speech. As she stepped from the podium, she deliberately turned her head and let her gaze sweep over her family's section. She held her father's devastated eyes for one brief, profound second. She offered no smile, no nod, no acknowledgement. She simply let him see her, Captain Grace Miller, U.S. Army, a woman of substance, of backbone, of immense, quiet strength, wearing a uniform of profound respect. Having succeeded in the most demanding field imaginable, amounting to far more than he could have ever dreamed. Then she turned and walked away, the applause of her true community, the community of service, washing over her. The revenge was complete, dignified, and etched in the silence between them. She had taken his definition of weak and rewritten it with every early morning run, every mastered language tape, every stressful deployment, every hard-earned rank. She had proven that trust is earned through action, not granted by blood, and that the most powerful family one can have is sometimes the one forged in shared sacrifice, symbolized by the uniform on your back and the medals over your heart. On the flight back to her duty station, Grace touched the cool metal of her new medal, not with triumph, but with a deep, abiding peace. The girl from the restaurant was gone, her small life exchanged for one of immense purpose. She had not just joined the army, she had become it. And in doing so, she had finally, irrevocably come home.